Reflexive Verben, reflexive verbs in German. In today's video, I will show you the German reflexive verbs. So how do they work? Which ones are actually always reflexive and which ones are not always reflexive? And does it mean if a verb is reflexive in English that it's also reflexive in German? Hi, my name is Jan and I'm your German teacher here on EasyDeutsch, your YouTube channel for German grammar. Today's topic is Reflexive Verben, so reflexive verbs. They do exist in English, but they're used a little bit different. Reflexive verbs are always something that you really have to pay attention to, no matter what's your native language. And with the help of my ebook, German Grammar Explained Easily, I will teach you now everything you have to know about the German reflexive verbs. So let's switch into my ebook. Now we're here in my ebook, German Grammar Explained Easily. So let's go from my table of content and let's jump right there to our today's topic, reflexive verbs. And there we go. So let's zoom in. Reflexive verbs always require an additional reflexive pronoun. Reflexive pronouns are a special pronoun like mich, dich, and so on. And they can only be in accusative or dative case. If you don't know what's a reflexive pronoun, please check out my video in the info cards first, because it's important for you to know what a reflexive pronoun is. Check that one out first and then come back to this video here. Similar with accusative and dative case. If you have no idea what that is yet, please check out my videos about the cases first. I will link the playlist here in the info cards for you too. But now let's continue with our video about reflexive verbs. So the reflexive verbs have a pronoun that's always related to the subject of the sentence. That means that the subject of the sentence, so the person or the thing we are talking about, is the same like the person or the thing we're talking to, or the one that we're using for the action. So that's one and the same thing, and that's reflexive. So it's referring back to the subject. For example, ich wasche mich jeden Tag, so I wash myself every day. Du interessierst dich für Anna. You're interested in Anna in English, but in German, the word by word translation is you interest yourself for Anna. So that sounds very weird in English. So here you have to keep in mind here the translation is not always the exact same thing in German like it is very, very often. But with reflexive verbs, you have to pay attention. Often it works with myself and yourself, but especially with true reflexive verbs, it doesn't, because sometimes you have to use myself and yourself in English, but you don't in German, and the other way around. And that's one of those cases, because that's a true reflexive verb. What that means just in a second. And we always have to use the reflexive pronoun here, but in English, it just isn't. So that's why it's very important that you actually know what's a reflexive verb. And in the dictionary, you actually find this with S, a point, and then the verb. And then that means it's a reflexive verb, and you always have to add the reflexive pronoun here. It's actually not too hard, even if you're not so perfect with accusative and dative yet, because only in the first person singular and in the second person singular, they're actually different. So it's either mich or mir, or du goes to dich and dir. So, and in the third person singular and plural, they're exactly the same, but you still have to put them. And again, like I told you, true reflexive verbs are always reflexive. So that means you always have to put this reflexive pronoun in there. And what makes them different from the partially reflexive verbs is also you can't replace or omit the reflexive pronoun here. So you cannot leave it out. For example, if you say with this one here, we had ich wasche mich, but you could also say like, ich wasche mir die Hände. So I wash myself or I wash my hands. And here we can replace this with something else, and then it's not true reflexive. But this one, here we cannot replace this with anything else because it has to be referring back to the actual subject. And we can also never ask for it because with waschen, we can ask, what are you washing? My hands, myself. But you cannot do this with interested. But again, in English, that translation is not so perfect because it's not reflexive in English. And here, one more example. Ich konzentriere mich auf den Unterricht. It's impossible to use this without mich. I concentrate myself on the lesson. So in English, it would be different. So here, konzentrieren is one of those true reflexive verbs. Same like interessieren. You simply have to notice. That's why in your vocabulary list, you should always put the S dot in front of the verb if it's one of those, if you see this in the dictionary. And this is the common version, but you can also see it's like this or like this. And always keep in mind, it might not be reflexive in your own language. So what works much better, usually with the direct translation to any other language, not just English, is the partially reflexive verbs, because here it's just out of sense when it's reflexible by referring back to the main subject. So this is the exact same person. Ich wasche mich. So it's me washing myself. So me and myself, that's the same person. And that's why reflexive. But ich wasche die Wäsche, that's me. I'm washing the clothes. So me and the clothes, that's not the same thing or person. So not reflexive. And that's just a simple translation from English or also any other language. So very important here, I guess, for most of you is also the question, how do you figure out if it's dative or accusative case that you have to use for the reflexive pronoun? Well, if there's only one object in the sentence, you have to use accusative. So for example, ich wasche mich. But if there are two objects in the sentence, then the reflexive pronoun takes the dative case. For example, ich wasche mir die Hände. So here we have myself, the hands. So I wash myself the hands. Like this, it's dative. I wash myself, this is accusative. There is, of course, an exception if the verb requires a certain case. It can be different. For example, ich helfe mir, I help myself. Here we have dative, despite it's just being one object, but the verb helfen is a dative verb that requires dative case. If you don't know what verbs require certain cases, please check out my video in the info cards on the verbs with complements. What is very important here for you to know is also an object only counts as object if there's no preposition here in front. So the moment you put in preposition, it's not counting as object anymore, it's just a prepositional complement. That's the term for it. One more example here. Ich wasche mich im Bad. So im Bad has a preposition in front and that doesn't count. So we stick to mich. Only if there's no preposition here in front, because only then it's actually an object. And let's have a look at the word order at the end. Word order, the pronoun wants to stick as close as possible to the verb here, so position 3 in a main sentence. Ich wasche mich heute Abend. So it cannot go in position 1, but it wants to stay really close here, so everything else usually comes after the reflexive pronoun, even if it's also important stuff that you want to put that usually wants to stay in front there. In a question where you actually have to put the verb in the first position, it sticks to its third position, wäschst du dich, because the subject overrules this. So the subject is stronger than the reflexive pronoun. Subject is always the strongest part after the verb itself, because the verb pretty much wants to be where it wants to be and always overrules everything. The next most important thing is the subject, and then we have the reflexive pronoun. And if it's a subordinate clause, so a Nebensatz, pay attention, it doesn't go with the verb. the reflexive pronoun really likes its position number 3. So here we go. It stays there. Position number 1 is the subordinating conjunction, unterordnende Konjugation. If you want to know which words send the verb to the end, check out the video in the info cards. Followed by the subject, the ruler, and then we have the reflexive pronoun already here. And even if you use modal or auxiliary verbs, it's the same thing. It's usually on position 3, unless you put something else than the subject on position 1. For example, if you say, heute kann ich mich waschen. Heute Abend kann ich mich waschen. Then it moves back because, again, position 1, the most important information, it goes there. Verb is the overall thing that always decides everything. Then the next important thing is the subject, and then whatever else comes is more powerful. And the third most powerful thing is the reflexive pronoun. Now you know all the secrets of German reflexive Verben, reflexive verbs. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to write them in the comment section below. And of course, if you liked this video, don't forget to put the click on the thumbs up button. That's always a great support, as well as your subscription to my channel, and maybe you even want to share it with your friends. Thank you very much in advance. If you want to support me even further, you can buy the ebook that you've just seen here in this video, either alone or together with its other friends. I have 10 ebooks about the German and grammar out there where I explain to you everything in an easy to understand way from a student's perspective. So check them out in the video description. And then I hope I will see you again in one of my other lessons. And until then, viel Spaß und Erfolg beim Deutschlernen.